broadcasting across the United States. Hank Hanegraaff.
Thank you very much, Randy. We are moving from Palm Sunday, which we celebrated this past Sunday, to Easter or Pascha, which we will celebrate, at least in the Western Church, this weekend, this coming Sunday. Again, the calendars of the Eastern and the Western Church are different, but for Western Christians who are moving towards the celebration of Easter this coming Sunday, I want to once again drive home the reality that this is our hope. If Christ has not risen, eat, drink, and be merry, because tomorrow you die. But Christ has risen. Christ has risen indeed. Christ is the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. We too will rise. And again, there's a four-part argument. The first part of that argument is Christ suffered fatal torment. The second is the tomb is empty. The third is Christ appeared. And the fourth is the transformation of literally thousands and thousands of people to this very day. But I want to start in this segment on fatal torment. And I do that because the fatal suffering of the historical Jesus is one of the most well-established facts of antiquity. It's attested by men like Flavius Josephus. He was an eyewitness to the many details and descriptions that are found in the New Testament. But it's also attested by such historical luminaries as Cornelius Tacitus. Cornelius Tacitus, widely deemed to be the greatest first-century historian, at least in the ancient Roman Empire. In his Annals, Tacitus forthrightly chronicles the death of Jesus Christ. Here's what he says. Christus, who suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilatus, or Pontius Pilate. So Tacitus not only provides corroborating testimony to the biblical account of Christ's fatal torment at the hands of Pilate during the reign of Tiberius Caesar, but he draws attention to the whole of the Christian movement which had spread from Judea to Rome. So even in a modern age of scientific enlightenment, there is virtual consensus among New Testament scholars, and I'm talking about both conservative and liberal, that Jesus died on the cross, that he was buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, and that his death drove his disciples to despair. Now, the fatal torment of Jesus Christ begins in the Garden of Gethsemane after an emotional Last Supper. And I'm going to read here from something that comes from my book, Resurrection. This is not original with me. All the documentation you can find in my book, Resurrection. But after an emotional Last Supper, Christ experiences a medical condition known as hematidrosis. And what that means is tiny capillaries in his sweat glands rupture, and they mix sweat with blood. After Christ was arrested by the temple guard, he was mocked, he was beaten, he was spat upon. And the next morning, battered, bruised, and bleeding, our Lord was stripped. He was subjected to the brutality of Roman flogging. A whip replete with razor-sharp bones and lead balls reduced his body to quivering ribbons of bleeding flesh. As our Lord slumped into the pool of his own blood, soldiers threw a scarlet robe across his shoulders. They thrust a scepter into his hands. They pressed sharp thorns into his scalp. And then after mocking him, the soldiers took the scepter and repeatedly struck our Lord on the head. And then a heavy wooden beam was thrust upon Christ's bleeding body, and he was led away to the place of the skull. There he experienced excruciating torment in the form of the cross. The Roman system of crucifixion fine-tuned to produce maximum pain. In fact, I should point out that the word excruciating, literally out of the cross, was coined to fully codify its horror. When I was going through my battle with cancer, I often describe some of the pain that I experienced as excruciating, and as soon as I would do that, I'd stop myself. Because the word excruciating is reserved exclusively for what Christ experienced. What I experienced was insignificant by comparison. At any rate, at the place of the skull, Roman soldiers drove thick 7-inch iron spikes through Christ's hands and feet. Waves of pain pulsated through Christ's body as the nails lacerated his nerves. Breathing became an agonizing endeavor as Christ pushed his tortured body upward to grasp just small gulps of air. In the ensuing hours, Christ experienced cycles of joint-wrenching cramps, intermittent asphyxiation, excruciating pain as his lacerated back moved up and down against the rough timber of the cross. And then with his passion complete, Jesus gave up the spirit. Shortly thereafter, a Roman legionnaire drove his spear through the 5th interspace between the ribs, upward through the pericardium into Christ's heart. And immediately there rushed forth blood and water, demonstrating conclusively that Jesus had suffered fatal torment. What I say in my book, A Resurrection, is that the best medical minds of ancient and modern times have demonstrated beyond a shadow of a doubt that Christ's physical trauma was indeed fatal. So the first part of the argument for Christ's resurrection is that he indeed died. He suffered fatal torment. And when we think about the excruciating agony that Christ experienced, we can only imagine, we can never comprehend, that the God who spoke and the universe leapt into existence would condescend to cloak himself in human flesh so that he could overcome a triple barrier, as St. Nicholas Cabasilas put it, a triple barrier of nature, sin, and death. Of nature by his incarnation, of sin by his death, and of death by his resurrection. Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory, has made it possible for you and I to rise from the dead. And so when we look at our own mortality, we look beyond it to a reality. of living in resurrected bodies, in bodies that will be like they would have been if sin had never entered this world. Living in resurrected bodies in a resurrected universe. That's the hope of Christianity. And forever exploring the beauty, the grandeur, the glory of an ineffable God, which we will never come to an end of.